Okay, so what if I told you that an ancient Greek idea about poetry, which for them really meant making, could actually change how you look at everything? Your favorite novels, TV shows, maybe even those detective stories you love.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? And that's exactly what we're getting into today. We're diving into Aristotle's Poetics, which
Mm.
is just such a foundational piece of literary criticism. And we're using the book you provided to explore its, well, surprisingly timeless ideas about creative writing.
Yeah, and just a quick note, if this sparks your interest, you should definitely check out our YouTube channel, Mindful Moments. It uses AI to analyze books, which is a great way to, push your own thinking further after listening here.
Definitely. Now, it's really important to grasp that when Aristotle says poetry or poiesis, he means something much broader than just verse. It's about imaginative creation. He focuses on epic and tragedy, sure, but he himself points out it's the imaginative part, not necessarily the meter that counts.
Got it. So we'll use the word poetry, but we mean imaginative writing generally.
Exactly. Novels, plays, the lot.
Okay, so to understand Aristotle here, we kind of need the backstory, right? He wasn't writing in a vacuum, he was responding to someone.
Absolutely. To his own teacher, Plato. You have to understand Plato's view first. In the Republic, especially books 2, 3, and 10, Plato is, well, he's pretty hard on poetry.
Hard is putting it mildly. Didn't he think poets were basically liars?
Uh-huh. Liars about the gods, for one thing, making them seem flawed, petty, not very godlike. And he also thought that getting swept up in emotions in plays, weeping, laughing hard, was actually bad for your character. It weakened your rational side.
Right, and then there was that whole philosophical argument about imitation. Like, reality is already a shadow of the ideal forms, and poetry is just an imitation of that shadow.
Precisely. An imitation of an imitation. So poets were, in his view, 2 steps removed from truth. And because they appeal to our emotions, our sort of lower nature, he saw them as corrupting influences.
To the point where he wanted to kick dramatic poets out of his ideal state?
He did. It was a serious charge against the arts. And Aristotle, in Poetics, is fundamentally trying to answer these charges, to settle this ancient quarrel, as he calls it, between philosophy and poetry.
So he takes Plato on directly, on the theology, the ethics.
He does, but in his own way. He doesn't just refute Plato point by point within Plato's own system. First off, Aristotle fundamentally rejects Plato's metaphysics, the whole theory of forms. So the imitation of an imitation argument doesn't hold the same weight for him.
Okay, so no forms. How does he defend poetry ethically then, if it stirs up emotions?
Well, Aristotle's ethics are different too. It's all about finding the mean, the appropriate amount of feeling in action. He suggests poetry, especially tragedy, can actually help us achieve that. It helps us understand and maybe moderate our emotions.
Interesting. And the charge about misrepresenting the gods.
There, Aristotle sort of sidesteps. He subtly shifts the focus of tragedy. It becomes less about direct divine messages or actions and more about human choices and consequences within a larger cosmic order, but, tacitly secularizing it to some extent.
It sounds like he saw tragedy itself as having a history, like it grew into its final form.
That's a really good way to put it. He describes tragedy evolving, going through stages, almost like a living thing, until it reached what he saw as its natural condition.
And for him, that peak was Sophocles.
Yeah, exemplified by Sophocles. He points to specific features. 3 actors, the use of iambic trimeter as the most speech-like meter, a chorus that was integrated, but whose lyrical parts were maybe less central than they once were.
Now, some people might balk at that, right? Saying one specific style is the natural or mature state of an art form seems a bit prescriptive.
That's a totally fair point. Applying a biological model of growth and perfection to human creativity is definitely debatable. But it's interesting, you see similar kinds of arguments elsewhere, like think about Francis Fukuyama and the end of history, idea that liberal democracy is the final mature form of government.
Okay. So it's a way of thinking about development, even if we question the final form idea itself.
Exactly. And regardless of that model, Aristotle's analysis highlights why tragedy, in the form he knew it, had such enduring power as representational art.
So what did he see as the absolute core components, the must-haves for a tragedy?
He lays out 6: story or plot, which he called mythos, then the moral element, ethos, the style or diction, lexis, the thought or ideas being expressed, dianoia, the visual aspect, staging, opsis, and finally, music, melos.
6. Okay, that's quite a list. Were they all equally important to him?
No, definitely not. He was most interested in the first 2, mythos and ethos. story, and the moral dimension. He actually says that the power of tragedy can be felt just by reading it. The staging and music are additions, potentially powerful ones, but not essential to the core experience.
Okay, let's nail those two down then. Muthos and ethos. We translate them as plot and character maybe, but it sounds like there's more to it.
There is. Muthos isn't just what happens. It's the systasis pragmaton, the putting together of the events, the structure, the causal chain, how things are arranged.
The architecture of the story.
Precisely. And ethos is tricky. It's partly the moral element of the drama itself, but also the moral character of the persons within the drama, revealed through their choices and actions.
And he famously puts the story, the muthos, first, like even above character. That feels counterintuitive sometimes today. We talk so much about character-driven stories.
He absolutely does. For Aristotle, the actions, the plot, are primary. Characters are necessary for the action. They exist to make the story happen. He says, tragedy is an imitation not of people, but of action and life.
Wow. Okay, so what makes a good muthos then?
It needs to be a whole self-contained thing, a beginning, a middle, and an end, all logically connected. It needs magnitude, proper length, not too short, not so sprawling you can't hold it in your mind.
Right.
And crucially, unity of action. It should focus on one main sequence of events, not just, everything that happened to one hero, like in some epics he critiques, like a Heraclide or Thesiad, which just string together unrelated adventures.
He admired Homer for this, didn't he? How the Iliad isn't the whole Trojan War, but focuses on the wrath of Achilles.
Exactly. Or the Odyssey, on Odysseus' return. A specific, unified action. And here's a fascinating connection from the book you shared. Dorothy Sayers pointed out how well Aristotle's plot principles apply to all things detective stories.
No way. Detective stories. How?
Think about it. A good detective story is a perfectly unified whole. It has a clear beginning, the crime, a middle, the investigation, the diesis or complication, and an end, the solution, the lysis or unraveling.
Mm-hmm.
It needs that appropriate scale. Everything exists for the sake of solving that central puzzle.
That's brilliant. The clues, the red herrings, the peripeteia, the reversal, maybe when the detective realizes they were wrong, and the anagnorisis, the discovery of the truth, it maps perfectly.
It really does. It shows how fundamental these structural ideas are. Aristotle identifies that typical tragic pattern. Complication, reversal, recognition, resolution. It's a powerful narrative engine.
This changes how I'll watch the next mystery show. Okay, moving on. Aristotle also talks about poetry dealing with universals, unlike history, which deals with particulars. How can fiction be more philosophical than history?
This is such a key idea. For Aristotle, the poet's job isn't to say what did happen, that's the historian. The poet's job is to show what might happen, or what would likely or necessarily happen in a certain situation, given certain characters.
So it's about probability and necessity. What's plausible for human nature?
Exactly. Poetry explores universal truths about how people behave, what motivates them, the consequences of their actions. History tells you what Alcibiades specifically did. Poetry tells you what a person like Alcibiades would probably do.
That's why he says poetry is more philosophical and more serious than history. It's dealing with these broader patterns of human experience.
Precisely. And think about how fictional characters become types. We talk about someone being a Scrooge or an Uri or a Romeo. They embody universal human traits.
But what about truth, if it's made up? You mentioned Gorgias's paradox. The deceived are wiser than the undeceived. That sounds completely wild.
It does. But think about it in terms of artistic experience. Engaging with a powerful fiction, allowing yourself to be deceived by its reality, can lead to deeper insights than remaining detached. And later thinkers, like Sir Philip Sidney, argued something similar. The poet nothing affirmeth, and therefore never lieth.
Meaning, because it's not claiming to be literal fact, it can't be accused of factual falsehood. It operates on a different level of truth.
Kind of. It's creating its own world with its own internal logic and truths about human nature.
But Shelley raised a good point, didn't he? That even great art can unintentionally carry, maybe even promote, a questionable ideology. He used Paradise Lost as an example.
Yeah, Shelley's insight is sharp. He argued that Milton, despite intending to justify God's ways, actually made Satan the more compelling, almost heroic figure. It shows that the truth a work conveys can be complex, sometimes even contrary to the author's explicit intent.
Which contrasts with someone like Tolstoy, who had a very direct moral view. Art should communicate good, universal feelings. He loved Uncle Tom's Cabin for that reason.
Right. Tolstoy had a strong, moralistic, didactic view. But as the book notes, the 20th century largely moved away from that, towards valuing art more autonomously for its own sake, its aesthetic qualities, rather than just its message.
Okay, let's get back to those emotions, pity and fear, and Aristotle's famous concept of catharsis. What is this purification or purgation really about?
Catharsis is complex, and scholars still debate it. But the core idea seems tied to his ethics. Tragedy arouses pity for undeserved suffering and fear that this could happen to us.
Yeah.
By experiencing these emotions intensely but safely, vicariously within the structure of the play, we somehow cleanse or clarify them.
So it's not about getting rid of pity and fear, but maybe about feeling them appropriately, understanding them better, finding that Aristotelian mean.
That's a very common interpretation. It's an emotional education, perhaps. Drama lets us feel these potentially painful things without the real-life cost. There's even a kind of pleasure in it, the sweet grief or the enjoyable thrill of fear. Think about why we enjoy scary movies, or why depictions of ugly things can still be artistically compelling.
Right, the pleasure of imitation, even of unpleasant things.
Exactly. And the book suggests this idea of catharsis might not be limited to tragedy or just pity and fear. Could other genres purify other emotions? Maybe certain plays help us process anger, or novels refine our understanding of love.
That's a really interesting extension. Now, you mentioned Aristotle saw the poet less as inspired genius and more as a maker, a craftsman.
Yes, Poetics literally means maker. For Aristotle, writing tragedy was a skill, a craft. It involved understanding plot construction, character consistency, language. While he doesn't entirely dismiss natural talent or even inspiration, he mentions a touch of genius or madness can help. His focus in Poetics is very practical. It's almost a handbook on how to make a good play.
Giving practical advice on structure and choices.
Absolutely. Much more about technique than, say, self-expression.
And he briefly touches on epic poetry, too, comparing it to tragedy.
He does. He notes differences in meter, obviously, and length epic has a much grander scale. But he argues tragedy is actually superior, partly because it has music and spectacle as extra tools, but mainly because it's more concentrated. Its effect is more unified and intense because it's shorter and performed.
So, despite focusing mainly on tragedy and being lost for centuries in the West, Poetics had this huge comeback.
Oh, massive. When it was rediscovered in the Renaissance, it became hugely influential. Figures like Sidney, later Milton, even Shelley, as we saw, they all engaged with Aristotle, often using his own arguments to defend poetry against its critics. Its legacy is just immense.
It really makes you think. This whole conversation has been incredibly illuminating, digging into how these ancient ideas from Aristotle still resonate so much with storytelling now. And this kind of exploration is exactly what we aim for here on our podcast, looking into ideas that help us all gain a deeper understanding.
It definitely leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Thinking about all the ways we tell stories today, films, streaming series, video games, are they achieving a similar kind of catharsis? That emotional processing and purification Aristotle talked about with tragedy? It's a great question to ponder.
Absolutely. And for you listening, if you found this discussion valuable, please do subscribe to our podcasts, share it with friends or colleagues who might appreciate it. And if you want to delve deeper into the book we discussed, you can find a link in the show notes. Purchasing through it helps support our work.
But the most important thing really is to take these ideas away with you. Think critically, think deeply about the stories that shape your world.